diverse audiences, today we're talking about diversity and global and international PR. And there is a difference between those two. Usually they're used interchangeably, but they don't mean the same thing. They don't focus on the same thing, and they don't approach the topic of PR quite the same. So I want you to understand the differences and see how it's used. Diverse audiences refers to people in the same area, but we're talking about ethnic differences, maybe generational differences, lifestyle differences. So ethnically, for example, if you were doing an ethnic diversity PR campaign, you might target the Hispanic community. I think it was in this class that I talked about the campaign Check It Right, You Ain't White with the Arab community during the census. That was a diversity PR campaign because it's still here in the US, but it's on a specific subsect, a specific cultural group in that time. There's also been campaigns that target the elderly, or campaigns that target college age, or campaigns that target young moms. These are all diversity because it identifies a specific group. You might be looking at lifestyle, so there's a lot of religious PR. There's a lot of, there is some disability. There's more with the gay and lesbian movement. There is some with the choice to even, I grew up in a town of hippies. So there were campaigns targeting the hippie lifestyle. Those are all subsects. It's diversity. It's things that make us different while we all live together. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, it's important to understand that these are differences in the groups you're working with in this location. Because global or international PR then is the planned and organized effort of a company, institution, or government to establish and build relationships with publics of other nations. So it's not quite correct to say diversity PR is targeting China. That's global, that's international. Yes, they are different ethnically, right? But it's global, it's international because it's in a different geographic location. It's on another country, and it's specifically targeting towards another nation. Does that make sense? So diversity is referring to the kinds of publics that you might do campaigns for here in the US. International or global PR is referring, pardon me, to the kinds of campaigns you would do if you were targeting another country or another nation. Some people get that mixed up because when you think of ethnic PR and doing something around diversity within that, you can quickly lump in, oh, we're going to do something with Germany, and we're going to do something with South Africa, and we're going to do something with Guatemala, so we're being very diverse. Yes, you're diverse in the fact that you're using the word correctly and there's differences. But it's not diverse PR. That's international or global PR. And there's different ways to think about those approaches. Excuse me. When you are looking at diverse PR, so we're talking about the same geographic location, but different groups within that. First, you want to identify the audience's values. Why do you think that might be important? Yeah. Yeah, there are very different approaches to life. So, for example, the Hispanic community. I grew up on the border of Mexico. A huge value within the Hispanic community is family. That is big. If you do a campaign that's more individualistic, more about getting out on your own, it doesn't really resonate as well with the culture, right? Because they're about family, and that's a key value. My husband was a youth pastor in a Korean church. What do you think a value of the Korean community is? Education is huge. Like, I asked these kids what they did in their spare time, and they're like, I am studying. I was like, okay. They knew more about the SATs when they were like sophomores in high school than I did, and I've taken that and now I teach at college. Intense. And a lot of that comes because their parents have the value of education for them, because they understand what that can do to build a future for them. So that is a huge value in that culture and that diversity here in the US. So you can usually identify values. If you look at religious campaigns, you can identify the values of that religious group. It doesn't do a lot to market something to a Christian community or to do a PR campaign to a Christian demographic around Easter Sunday for something that's like, go to a sporting event. Let's target the Christians for that sporting event that happens on Easter. Doesn't happen because it doesn't hit our values, right? Christians most likely will be at church on Easter. Understanding the values in diversity helps. Identify the audience needs for communication. So again, diversity could be something like literate and illiterate, or homeless community. So if you're doing a PR campaign for a homeless group, is it really going to be that effective to try to get everyone to sign up for an email? Probably not. That's not their primary mode of communication. Some of them probably have email, but that's not the best way to reach that audience. That's not their need for communication. Most likely you want to get out there and talk to them. You want to do face-to-face. But if you're trying to reach college students, it could be probably pretty effective to use social media, right? Because a lot of college students are on social media. That's a need for their communication. If you are targeting 65 and older, what's a good way to reach them? Phone. They like the phone. There's something about it. They trust you because they talked to you. They heard your voice, and you're not going to mislead them because you're sitting there to talk to them. So they trust that and they appreciate that. I can send my grandpa emails. He'll email me back, and I can't tell if it's spam or him really emailing me, just because he writes differently on email than we ever would interact. And that's a need for communication. Then identify the audience's interest. You can understand their values, and you can understand how to communicate with that specific group of people, but if it doesn't interest them, what good is it, right? It's not going to be very beneficial. So part of your job as a PR professional is to be able to identify the best audiences for these campaigns. And if your audience is not interested, they're probably not a very good public for your campaign, unless you're dealing with a passive audience or maybe a latent audience that you need to create a campaign for them to care. One of the groups that 6th Street PR is working with this semester is Up and Running. And this is a group of professional guys who got together and they decided to start this Up and Running organization that helps homeless people run in marathons and really gives them this concept of valuing life and taking care of themselves and accomplishment through running. So I will be honest, I've never run anything. I was just talking to someone today about how to start, and they're like, oh, okay, so like, where are you at in the scale? Like, could you start at a marathon, or are you thinking like half marathon? And I'm like, how far is a block? Like, I don't know. So he was like, well, okay, you would start with a 5K. I had to become interested in it because I saw my friends doing it. Running to me looks painful, and I'm not sure I could survive it. So you might need to get your audience interested. You might need to figure out a way, okay, they're probably not going to listen. If you told me to go run a marathon, I'd be like, cool, I'll see you later. But maybe you can make me interested if you use the right person to talk to me about it, if you give me the right reasons, right? So audience values, audience needs, and audience interests. Those are the 3 things you need to consider for diverse PR. Does that make sense? Cool. Then you have global PR considerations. And this is different because, again, global is dealing with other nations. And that means it's not only dealing with a group here. Yes, the Korean community here has a lot of the same qualities as Korean communities in Korea, but they also have a lot of differences because they're here in the US. They have different factors influencing how they behave. One thing to consider is the power distance. And that's really described at typically a global perspective. So power distance for Japanese people, power distance for European people, maybe in Germany, or maybe it's US, and it's how tolerant are they about unequally distributed decision-making power. The examples given in your reading was Malaysia versus Austria. And ideally, you're wanting to understand, are the people used to having a strong voice? So for here in the US, people typically feel like they should have a strong voice in making decisions, that they should get to dictate that. But what if you looked at a communist country? Do you think they're used to making their decisions? They're expecting to have a voice in it. You guys are either really typing or not very tuned into communist countries. Either way, they're not expecting to have it. They're used to having it dictated, right? So that's something to think about. When you're sending out information, if you have a country that's used to having a lot of ability to make choices and govern their action, and your PR campaign is more unilateral, it's not going to resonate well. Or if you give a country that's not used to having to make a ton of choices, all of these decisions that they have to make before they can get to the end goal that you want them to have, they're probably not going to respond very well. Individualism is another thing, or collectivism. So individualism is something, obviously, anyone know individualism before I go into it? All right, I'm going to figure out a way to get you all talking at some point. Individualism is what the word says. It's about being the individual. It's about me. It's about my perspective. Collectivism is more when you're looking at it from the community, from your whole group. So typically, US culture, Canada culture, we're seen as more individualistic. We think more in how do I advance, how do I make the next step, more individual. And I'm not saying right or wrong, you have to understand that it's just a different perspective. Collectivist culture is what's good for the group. How do we advance the group together? This is a very interesting thing for me because my husband is from Hong Kong and he's Korean. So he was raised in China. And he likes me to specify it's Hong Kong. I think of it as China. And he has a Korean background. Both of those are collectivistic cultures. Then comes me from the US with a very individualistic perspective. When we were trying to date, that's a very interesting thing because it's like, well, my family needs this and here's how we're approaching it. I'm like, your family? This is you and me. Why are we talking about the whole group? It's because he comes from a collectivistic culture. You don't think about yourself, you think about the good of everyone. And it's different perspectives. So your PR campaign, if it is something that's focusing on advance yourself, take the next step. So a lot of higher ed, if you've watched their commercials or their PR campaigns, it's all about you reaching that next level. It really doesn't resonate the same way in a collectivistic culture. You'd have to talk more about help your family, give security to future generations. That's the concept that they're looking at. Masculine versus feminism, which I put in parentheses, competitive versus nurturing. I think it's weird that they call it masculine versus feminine, but that's what your reading talks about. And that's kind of Japan versus Sweden. So are you more competitive? Are you from a country that really is rigorous? Are you needing to advance really quickly? Or is it more live and let live, we're all good? Uncertainty avoidance is how comfortable are you with not knowing all the answers, with going through a process but not having clear-cut definitions. Long-term versus short-term orientation. Again, China versus US, you'd think I was stuck on that or something. So the idea is, do you need immediate gratification? Are you used to that? A lot of times in the US we are. Or are you thinking more long-term? Is it like, okay, I'm investing in my 401k to touch it in 50 years? What are you? All of these questions, the answers to these, help you determine what messaging to use, how to communicate with a culture. Because if you are using something that is totally foreign, if you'll forgive the pun, to the country that you're trying to reach, it's not going to reach them in a way that they understand. They may hear you, you may get a lot of your message out, you may even get media coverage, but really that does no good if the people aren't absorbing it. Our goal is communication. Our goal is reaching that audience in a way that's meaningful to them and can result in change, right? And if it's not meaningful to them, then they're probably not going to go through the change, and all your work is wasted, simply because you didn't take time to understand and think through their perspective. I think one of the hardest things can be coming from the US is thinking about other perspectives and trying to understand it and articulate to them in a way that's meaningful without thinking that they're backwards or without thinking that it's too bad they just don't know how we do it here in the US. That's the wrong perspective to bring into this because from the get-go, you're not understanding their culture. I really don't like it. Okay, I'll give you a story. US. I was out in Korea, from the US, obviously, and trying to teach Korean. And they, understandably so, have some problems with all of the junk food from the US and the bad things it can do. True, I agree. But it was so funny to me because everything there, Korean, they'd tell me, oh, it's so healthy for you, so healthy. So I was like, cool. I gained 15 pounds. It's not that healthy because I was there for 3 weeks and I was like, this is healthy? They're like, yeah, eat all the kimchi. And I love Korean food. But then I realized it's perspective. They were coming at it from, well, US food is very unhealthy from the get-go. Here's the Korean food that's much better. When I came home and I realized I started learning how to cook, it's pretty similar, but it's your perspective. And it's what kinds of food. Am I going to go and eat McDonald's every day? Then yeah, that's really bad. But if I'm eating my salads versus eating 3 bowls of rice with kimchi, which is glorious, I'm probably gonna gain the weight. And it's because their perspective from the beginning was that US food is bad. That's a very minor level example. But if your perspective from the beginning is that another culture's approach to family or education or power or nurturing versus competition or whether they can handle uncertainty or not, if your natural position is you're wrong, but I'm going to try to adjust this to meet you, your messaging is going to be off because you've already misunderstood them. Do you guys kind of understand those? Okay, we're going to look at several different things. I'm going to actually turn off the music so that it doesn't play in the background, which would probably be helpful when we get to it. we're going to look at a couple definitions, and I'm going to ask you guys to try to identify whether it's diversity, whether it's international, and we'll talk about it. This one should be pretty easy. What do you guys think? Yeah, this is about diversity. This is a campaign for PRSA. We did it 2 years ago after the census, and it was all about the diversity here in Orange County. So lots of ethnic groups, lots of age groups, lots of differences between capabilities, but diversity, because we're all in the same geographic location. Oh, there we go. What about this one? This is international. No wrong answer, guys. You can shout it out. This is global. Once you're starting to talk about what's the perspective from France, what's Spain's perspective, what is Kenya's perspective, what is Chile's perspective, what's the US perspective, what are the audiences there, that becomes international. That's a global conversation. You're not just talking about people from Spain who now live in the US in Orange County. You're talking about people still in Spain, living in Spain, and their life in Spain, right? So it's a global conversation. What about this? What would this campaign be targeting? Yeah, diversity, good. Age, you guys can say it with confidence. So this one, they had a whole bunch of different ones, but this specific one targeted, hey, is being old really bad? Is it really something that we should be so afraid of or look down upon? So it took place here in the US. It's part of the Dove Real Beauty campaign, but it specifically addressed the concept of age, which is a diversity thing. Here's one more. It's a very interesting campaign that I actually was intrigued by. I didn't even know what it was about until the end, and you guys have probably seen similar ones.
My name's Brandon Flowers, and I make music and sing songs. I have always loved music, and it was a part of my life. Just like every other teenager, I cranked up cassettes in the car, and I sang along, but I never thought I'm going to be on the other side. We've been so lucky with the success we've had. So many people come to see us play, and it's become kind of a celebration. By the end of the show, they seem to be, everybody seems to be a foot off the ground. One of the cliches when you're growing up, you get it kind of pounded into your head about how you need to have a job that you love. And for the most part, it's a really difficult thing for people to find a career that they really love. And it's a dream come true for me to have my job be this. I didn't think it was possible. There are a lot of connotations that come along with popular music or rock music, and it's usually, very sex-driven or money-driven. And I realized early on that wasn't the road for me, and that maybe because of the foundations that were laid in my life by my, mom taking me to church, that I wanted to take a different road, I guess. It's definitely not normal in this business at my age to have a wife and children. But I guess for me it all ties back to my roots and the example set from my parents. They were married for 44 years, and there was always a happiness in my home, and that's what I want. I think by the time I had a child, I had 17 or 18 nieces and nephews. So I was very accustomed to having kids around, and I knew the drill, and I saw what happened. And it was like there's a chamber in your heart that you don't know exists that opens up when you have a baby. It's just been such a great experience. I'm overflowing with that love that I didn't know was there before. It's hard booking tours. I get in arguments every now and then with our booking agent. If he puts us out on the road too long, come home and Am's gonna, hey Dad, I don't want to miss out on things. A lot of it is based around starting a family and realizing that that's what is important to me. In a lot of ways, I guess it's kind of surpassed, you know, the music now for me. I've definitely, as I've gotten older, been more cautious about lyrics, but I feel like I want to be a positive force in the world and I want to uplift people. A lot of people love to come up to me and tell me they were raised in a church. And they expect there to be this camaraderie about, oh, we've outgrown it now and we're smart enough now to not be in it. And it started happening so often that it really made me take a look at, you know, at myself. And I realized I was raised in it, and I still, there's still a fire burning in there. My name is Brandon Flowers. I'm a father, I'm a husband, and I'm a Mormon.
I hear the gasping. Was that what you expected? No. What were you guys thinking? A little bit of a different turn than you thought. Did you listen to the message? I did. I was captivated. I thought it was interesting. I was like, oh, that's so cool. He likes being a dad. It's really neat, his perspective in the industry and how he's made it and the kind of sound behind what he has. And it was interesting to have his sound in the background and then also like the old hymns going at the same time, like it's very different. There's texture. And then at the end, it's the I Am Mormon campaign. Anyone else seen other parts of it? It's a huge campaign. It's very, very significant. They've had billboards all over. They have a lot of spots like this. There's all sorts of different demographics targeting different sectors of diversity with people saying, I am a Mormon. And it's because they feel so misunderstood. They feel like as a subsect, the rest of the US doesn't even give them a chance. They don't get to say who they are beyond, oh, you're a Mormon, I'm not talking to you. So they tell their story, and then they say, and I'm a Mormon. Fascinating, fascinating campaign. There's also a ton of examples of poor PR. So here's a picture of Starbucks in the Forbidden City in China. Does anyone know what happened with that? Public outcry. Chinese kind of value the Forbidden City. They weren't too thrilled with this US commercialism coming in into the middle of the Forbidden City and setting up a Starbucks store. And they've had actually similar experiences since then. And I feel like this is a clear example of not understanding the culture you're going to. It's not that, oh, you don't understand how great Starbucks is. It's more so that as an organization, they misunderstood the values of the group they were going to. The key things that are important to the Chinese people need to be understood before you try to launch your company in China. This was a billboard campaign. I couldn't find any ones that I thought were actually real. Hong Kong, it will take your breath away. It's a catchy phrase, right? But there was a little problem with this. When do you think it launched? Around the Sars epidemic. Do you guys remember SARS? Okay, it was an airborne illness and it was really, really serious. But the campaign was already underway. It had been printed and things were going up. So right as this is making international news, all these billboards are coming out with Hong Kong. It will take your breath away. Awful, awful PR experience. You have things like the Red Cross. So Red Cross is a great symbol, but what about working in a country that's not friendly to Christianity? Because the Red Cross is not a Christian organization. They are a global humanitarian organization dedicated to serving people no matter what your religion. So they adjust it. They have the Red Crescent as well. That's one way that they've adjusted, saying, we understand that we're coming into your culture. We are the people from the outside, and we want to fit in with your culture, not expect you to say, oh, Red Cross, awesome. They made the Red Crescent. Campus Crusade for Christ underwent a name change. I think it's been 2 years now. It might be a little longer. To Cru. What country do you think would have had a really hard time with the name Campus Crusade for Christ? Spain, where the Crusades took place, right? So where Crusades take place, do they really want a Christian organization coming in and saying, hey, we're the Campus Crusade for Christ? Awesome, that was a horrible time in our history. Thank you very much. That's not really what they want. So again, you have to think through, where are you going? It's not about trying to make them adjust to you. As a PR person, we're supposed to love people and think they're fascinating and intriguing, and love that comes out of that is, let's be creative. Let's not offend these people. Let's truly understand them. Let's appreciate their culture and their perspective and their values so that we can have this dialogue. Remember, if you think through the history of PR, we're to a two-way dialogue. And in the stage we're at, it's with mutual understanding, mutual adjustment, not just us saying, you need to understand us. We are the providers of free health care when there's disasters. It's more, we really want this to be mutually beneficial. We really want to understand you and to reach you where you're at. So how can we make this work? And that's PR. That's engaging that. What's NOVA mean? No go. Guess how well that went over when GM had their PR campaign in Spain for their new car called a Nova. Yeah, it did not go well. So if it means no go, and they're trying to sell a car with the name of does not go. Just a final example. We're going to come back to the PR in action in just a few minutes. I want to review press releases. We covered it very, very briefly at the beginning of class, and my goal today is to walk through it a little more in depth and to have us practice writing a whole press release and to review the different parts you need. So essentially what a press release does is it's your attempt to capture the media's attention. You're saying, my client has something so incredible, I'm sending you information on it because it will really be interesting to your readers or your viewers. And press releases are written in journalistic style. They need to follow the AP style guide, which if you guys aren't familiar with, it's a book and it's rules on everything from when do you spell out a number to when do you write out the numbers to how do you do things such as the word Kleenex, when do you use that versus tissue. Every question you could have is answered in this book, and you follow it when you write a press release because you're sending it to a journalist. Press releases are a very, very competitive business. Depending who you're sending it to, they can get upwards from like 3,000 press releases a day. If you're sending it to more local, you might be looking at like 100. That's still a lot of competition. Some people estimate that about 90% of news is somehow informed by press releases, but that does not mean it's easy to get in the news. You have to ask yourself, what makes this newsworthy? The number one thing I get as I consult with clients is, oh, send out a press release about this. And I'll look at it and I'm like, okay, so you hit 10 years of what? Or you just created a new book. Like, that's not newsworthy, right? Because how many organizations turn 10 every day? Probably a lot. How many books are published every day? What you have to do as a PR person is find the story behind that. What makes it interesting? Why would anyone care? What has the organization done over those 10 years? What has been impacted? How has it changed the community? If it's a book, do not say you're selling a book. Tell the story that led to that book. How does this help the journalist? Your job is to be an assistant to the journalist with this. You are not trying to get free promotion. You're really trying to make their life easier. It's a mutually beneficial relationship because you're providing interesting information and they would share it with their readers. That benefits you, but you need to benefit them as well. So, for example, journalists say they really, really hate when they get these, they call it spam press releases, because all you do is you get a list and you send it out to everyone on that list, and half of them don't even cover the topic that you're talking about. So you send it to the New York Times news section and you're talking about a new cooking dish that someone created. It's just not matching, and they feel honestly disrespected by that you wasted their time by having them read this when there's hundreds more coming in and you didn't even bother to know who they were or what they write about. And that's why you want to know the journalist that you're sending it to, you want to know the publication that you're sending it to, and you want to know things such as the deadline. When do they need to have their information in? There's nothing worse for a journalist than getting a pitch for something that's already in the printer. So this happens a lot with magazines. Magazines take a long time to produce and go to print, so it's too late for anything, probably for summer issues at this point. You'd need to be looking at fall. But people would just now be saying, oh wow, like 4th of July, maybe we should pitch that idea. It's a little late. However, it's not late if you're doing something for blogs or newspapers. So you really need to understand, where are you hoping this shows up? What is their life like as a journalist? When do they need this information by? How do they need this information? Do they need video with it? Do they need pictures with it? What kind of quotes do they need? How available will you be? All of this plays into, are you helping the journalist and is it interesting for them? Do you feel like you understand why you use a news release? Okay. A news release is also giving them information, but they don't just run your news release. I think I've heard of that happening like once or twice and the station was really old. That's not how they're going to use it. They're going to pull pieces out of your press release. So don't expect that your piece appears as a news story. Expect to see one of the quotes you used or one of the figures you used, that sort of thing. And that's why you have to make such an interesting press release. This is an example of an online press release. If you take media relations, you're going to learn about creating a newsroom, creating media kits, how to work with the news. But what you will notice missing from here is things like links and different interaction. Because you live in the digital age, a digital press release should be highly interactive. You should be able to get all the information you want from a click of a finger. So one of my jobs when I was in the industry was creating an online newsroom for the agency I was with. And we did everything from making separate sections where there would be bios on people. So if you reference them in a press release, you could just highlight and hyperlink back to their bio. Because you want to keep a press release short, but you want the journalist to have all the information they need. It's kind of a tightrope to walk. So how do you do that? You use links. You use hyperactivity. You're going to notice everything we talked about at the beginning of the semester. You have the headline. This headline is a bit long. You have your dateline. The lead is the first opening area. Content, the boilerplate, which is talking about the company, and your contact information. Some of the main problems people have is either forgetting or writing boring headlines, because think about it, when you read the newspaper, don't you kind of headline skim? If it's not interesting, you move on, right? Journalists do the same thing, and who can blame them? If you're getting that many, if it's not an interesting headline, you probably don't want to read any more anyway. Then you go to the lead. The lead really needs to tell everything about the story. It needs to give the basics. So if you've taken journalism courses, you know it's kind of like the 5 W's and an H. It's an inverted pyramid. Most important stuff right up at the top, because they might not read all the way to the bottom, so get them in the beginning. Get them that interesting statement, that interesting perspective that makes it worth their while to print your story. Then you can fill in lots of content. Typically, you want to look at having at least one quote from like the CEO or the president of the company so they can pull that out and use it in their story. You would have some facts. You might include some sorry, guys. Some history. You have your boilerplate because then they can easily identify your organization. And another common error by people is forgetting your contact information. If you don't give your contact information, the journalist has no way to follow up with you, and they don't have the time to try to track you down. So put your contact information. If you are doing a print press release, which you're not, we're going to pretend when we write one that you guys are doing electronic, it would look more like this. So there's a little bit of a difference in organization. You can tell in a print one, you put your contact information way at the top. Any idea why? If you send it on print, that's the first time they know who it came from. If you send it electronically, they saw your name in the email because you sent it from your email account, right? So they identified who you were, and then they see your press release and you give them the information at the bottom. But if you send it in print, they don't know who you are except for the very beginning. You're going to notice it still has the headline, still does the dateline, still does the lead, still does the contact. You want to keep your press releases to 1 page. There are some people who say it's okay if it's a really good press release, go on to 2 pages. You don't have the time. No one has the time to read 2 pages. Don't send it on to 2 pages. But what you do is at the bottom, this says dash dash more dash dash. You need to either do dash dash end dash dash, dash dash more dash dash, or you can do hashtags, essentially. There's 3 or 5 centered in the middle, and that says it's the end. Because what you want the journalist to realize is when they got there, they're not missing any information they sent your way, or you sent their way. They have everything you intended them to get. And that's why it's really important, and that can often be missed. So make sure you put that at the bottom of everything.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.